I caught up with Fahad Moshiri and asked him straight, do you think Everton fans still have faith in you and your decisions?
Well, I hope so. I put my money where my mouth is, and, that is most that an owner can do. And I've done that. And some of the decision we've taken is together with the fans, right? All the managers who've been left, been driven by the fans, not by me initially. And I think you've got to stay with the manager to get the systems going, the players that he buys. I have a lot of faith in Frank. He'll get it right.
So what do you say to those who are planning to protest this weekend?
Well, I think protest is a democratic right of everyone, right? So I think their feeling is well known. We are communicating. But I would say the biggest thing is to support the team. So we need to give it, and they'll give it back to us.
And Fahad, finally, do you still have faith in your board? Many Everton fans have been asking for you to dismiss them, to sack them.
Look, I think they've been there for a long time. Some are new appointments, but they're long-standing, they're dedicated, they're local. And it's so important to keep a club in Liverpool, with roots in Liverpool. And those are the roots of the club. They love the club. They've been attending games under every condition. And it's just building a £760 million stadium, one of the best in the country, is an enormous challenge for a club. So I think they need to acknowledge that they're going through a transformation. And they are working extremely hard. And, I've added to the board every now and again to support. And, when needed, we do it again. But, you can't just take rash decisions. We have two big games, Saturday and on the 21st. That's the only focus.
Welcome to another episode of The Blue Room, the free weekly. And the saga continues. Everton is now like listening to Star Wars. It's like having Fahad Moshiri as Darth Vader, and the rest of us feel like Luke Skywalker and the Skywalker family trying to sort this football club out. It's me, Dave Downey. It's Peter McFarlane, and it is a return with the fantastic Mark Mosey as well. I don't want to make him feel embarrassed because I've missed him that much, but it is in fact it's an exclusive for us at the Blue Room that Mark Mosey has been involved in the football club falling apart, and he is Fahad Moshiri's right-hand man. Isn't that right, Mark?
Well, I actually think Star Wars is shit as well, so that analogy is pretty good for for my thoughts about Everton at the moment. I was
going to say, Mark, you're like the Emperor, not like Farhad's like the Darth Vader.
I thought if I take a nice quiet few weeks off over Christmas and come back in the new year all refreshed, then we'll have a vibrant and revitalised Everton team to talk about. But I don't even know if we'll get around to the actual footballing side of elements. So
well, I was going to say what's probably what's helped Frank Lampard and the lads out a little bit is that nobody's really talking about them, just the clown that owns us, and everybody else that's in and around the boardroom position. But so to get a little bit more serious about this, me and Matt Jones did a podcast at about 6:30 last night after Fahad Moshiri sent a letter to the fans forum, coming out with a lot of nonsense that he said before, reference to the FAB group that is meant to be sort of talking and communicating with Moshiri and the board and trying to make Everton more look like a football club than they do like a gang of idiots. That hasn't materialised in any sort of way, shape or form as far as I'm concerned. Pete, I'll come to you first on this. Initially, because you'll have heard this just before we've started, Fahad Moshiri chatting away to Jim White on TalkSport. We thought we'd start this podcast by sort of laying the foundations of what we're going to talk about here. But reading that letter last night, and Matt, being the journalist that he is, before we started, he said, I think we're going to get a letter tonight that's been released by Fahad Moshiri. Obviously, being a journalist, he'll have got it much sooner than everybody else. So I said, okay, we're going to do a pod on it. Who knows what he's going to say? In fact, in my opinion, though, to start with, Pete, he said a lot of what he's previously said before, which has generally been a load of nonsense and not really much at all.
Yeah, it was just a copy and paste job from the last letter that he sent out, talking about this, strategic review and sort of singing the praises of the board, and it was just totally non-committal. It was a nothing statement, to be honest with you. I think if he felt that was the best way to communicate with, thousands of Evertonians who are absolutely chomping at the bit to get to Saturday to show the board exactly what they think of them, I think he's very much mistaken. If anything, it's added fuel to the fire.
Yeah, pretty much exactly what I thought at the time, to be honest with you. I actually felt angry. I know everybody feels angry right now towards the club, and like we said, and this is definitely the time where we've seen every single fan base, pretty much, I don't know one that doesn't at the moment, have a combined and a very similar thought towards the football club. I know in the past, you think back to Arsenal last year, around about a year's time, when we had people walking out, 27th minute and all that stuff, very controversial, fans arguing with each other amongst the mark. And now, I certainly haven't seen in my lifetime as a Blue, other than when we've been successful, ironically, that we've seen the fan base completely come united in this. We signed the letter that was sent. It looks like it's had that effect because Moshiri's had to come out and say what he did last night, even though the irony is he come out and said things that he said before. And we had a lot of a discussion with Matt last night. Do go and listen to it, by the way. Need to say to our listeners, after that letter was brought out, me and Matt did a quick podcast on that and how we felt about it. The real anger and disdain I had towards this was, it just seemed to me, Mark, like nothing else has been learned from this. What he was talking about with the board. We'll talk about that piece that we played at the start when he was on TalkSport earlier this morning, in a minute or so. But basically, on both occasions, he's come out and really supported the board, which is going to have been the most angry thing for many that he's come out and said. And I have no idea why. And I said at the end of this last night and on the podcast we did, the most overwhelming thing that came to me was, I actually think the fella doesn't give a shit, or doesn't really give much of a shit. And look, how can anybody really say that about a man who's put hundreds of millions of pounds into a football club? But I can't see another way how an owner of a football club, a Premier League football club, and a billionaire at that he's earned himself as whatever he's done for his living as an accountant and whatever he's done business-wise. I don't understand how somebody could be so wrong and be so poor and act so poor and make decisions that are so ridiculous as an owner of a Premier League club, if he actually cared about it.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing you said there was, it appears as though Fahad Moshiri doesn't care about the club. However, he's put X amount of money into it. And I think that is certainly in Moshiri's mind, that is half the problem, in that, I know we're going to go back and look at the letter which came out on Wednesday, but even this morning, his quote to Jim White was, "I put my money where my mouth is." And it is almost as though that's his ultimate justification about why, he isn't able to, that's more important than any level of kind of personal investment or any emotional investment that he could make in Everton. All of the money going in, putting his money where his mouth is in his mind the most important thing. No one needs to sit anyone down and tell anyone about how important money is to a football club, but it almost, he's taken away all levels of value about how to use and how to spend that money. I could go and put a bid of 40 million in for the house next door to me, but putting that money where my mouth is doesn't mean that I'm producing good value or getting the best for that money.
Did you feel, just on that, Mark, like, sorry to interrupt you, just to go in on what you've just said there about that example of sort of what you've just said about your house next door and paying that money, it doesn't mean you've done it sensibly. Did you feel, and I did this morning, that everything he was saying to Jim White in the 2 minutes he spoke to him felt to me like it was a massive attempt on justification and what he'd done with the football club. And once again, he clearly doesn't read the room anyway. He clearly doesn't listen to fans, as we know he hasn't done for the last 6 or 7 years. But that to me, like I keep on saying, made me even more angrier at the lack of. It's not hard to find out what our fan base thinks, and clearly he's been told what the fan base thinks, and then he just seems to have batted off, as in to say, almost to say, these aren't intelligent people, and they will go away. For instance, if we go and win this game against Southampton on Saturday and get a draw away at West Ham next week, that to me is how it feels like I'm treated as an Everton fan.
I think as Everton fans, you kind of, you read an open letter like that, or you hear what he said. We cannot be fooled. Like we are not a fan base that will buy into a random owner coming in and just saying words that he thinks that football fans want to hear. Unfortunately for all of us, we are far too invested in this to have the wool pulled over our eyes like that. I mean, to point an accusatory finger at Everton fans in the way that he has done recently, in terms of, I'm sure there are more examples of this, but to cite the fact that we've been influential in dismissing managers, that is not me talking rubbish, by the way. He actually references that in his piece to Jim White today. I don't really think he gets the magnitude of what this is for us. And I think that everyone's hope last year, I think that the only positive that you could possibly have tried to extract from a relegation battle is that everyone would collectively come together at the end of May, at the start of June, and say, bloody hell, we were close there. We realised how incredibly important this is. Things need to change massively. Fahad Moshiri referenced the need for change in his letter to the fans last year. And it's semi-embarrassing now seeing people drag those quotes up from 12 months ago, because the harsh reality is obviously the fact that nothing has changed. The other thing that clearly hasn't changed, regardless of what you take from Moshiri and the content of what he brings out in these letters and these performances, the way that he communicates to people, he almost tried to champion how he communicates with the fans today. The fact that we are in 2023 still talking about why this guy feels the need to ring up his mate Jim White at Sky Sports as some form of official communication to the fans, like it as soon as you see that man's name on that yellow ticker at the bottom of the screen, you don't even need the context of what's been said, because you just know it's going to be irrelevant dribble that comes from his mouth, because it's honestly painful to hear him speak about Everton, because, as you referenced, Dave, there's no connect there in terms of what he thinks Everton is and how it should run, and how we all know it simply has to run in order for us to be successful. It's really difficult to kind of pick out what is the most dangerous and negative thing about that interview with Jim White this morning, because so many elements of it just echoed so many of our opinions about why that man shouldn't be there. And don't get me wrong, he has emphasised the point that I'm about to make in the last 24 hours. But for all of the conversations that we have about him, and every other individual element of the board, everything about the club as it is, everything about the club that it has been in the last few years, and all of the people that have come in and out the door, the major issue with Everton is Fahad Moshiri. Bill Kenwright, Denise Barrett-Baxendale, Graham Sharp, the kit man, everyone has had some form of negative impact on Everton in recent years. But the gold standard of why we are failing, and we will continue to fail if he doesn't move on, is Fahad Moshiri. And it's hard to say that for a football club and for a fan base who consistently longed for impactful investment for as long as we did. It was clearly the worst thing that ever could have happened to this team. And only Everton could have pulled that off, couldn't we, in terms of getting, £500 million. We've got, he referenced it himself this morning, we've got a £760 million stadium being built on the banks of the Mersey. I couldn't care less about it. I honestly couldn't care less about it, because what's the point in having it if we're going to open it with a Friday night home game against Luton Town on Sky? Like, no one can, and that's the sad reality of that stadium at the moment, is that every time someone speaks about it, or Jim White asks someone about it, or the club put out a video about it, you just think, I don't even want to look at this, because everything about, obviously, the playing staff and obviously the performances on the pitch on kind of resonating with that level of excitement that we need, but there's a disdain that everyone has for the club at the moment. And I think probably the only positive of the last 24 hours is that the kind of siege mentality that 40,000 Evertonians are going into that game with on Saturday has been amplified massively, because all he's done is got a big stick out of his pocket and just started prodding everyone and aggravating everyone again.
No, I think that's spot on. I think, excuse me, a couple of the issues you made there. I'm just going to push this towards you now, Pete. There's so much irony I find go on about the things that he said, the way in which he's acted, the players we even bought, the managers that we've taken, and he's banging on about on the letter in particular. It's almost like he backs Frank Lampard. The manager needs to stay there, and we need that level of consistency. Yet he's the man himself who's gone through, I think, 9 managers in total, if you include the likes of Unsworth and Ferguson doing the caretaker stuff. And I can't think of a time where it's not been his own decision to have brought those new managers in and you have to do the same thing. And I think he did refer to this today, if I'm thinking this correctly, about or in the letter, about he's listened to fans in regards to when we've changed managers. The only time I think he's done that, off the top of my head, would have been Benitez around just over a year ago. That's the only time, Pete, where he's actually referred to fans and thought, you know what, I best do this now. But I want to start this piece to refer to you first, and then Mark coming on the back of this. I mean, it is the most Everton way. The person that comes in who we thought was a saviour against the board that we've got, Bill Kenwright and Denise and everybody else in there. He's the person that's actually made things worse. And I think what Mark said there, Pete, it's the irony that I see is both the board and Moshiri in separate entities have actually helped each other, because the focus has been on each of them at various turns in every road you look down. So, for instance, right now, everybody's up against Moshiri more so than the board. Of course, they'll still mention the board. We'll still be mentioning the board. We'll still be discussing the board. But because of that letter yesterday and the things that he's done in the last 24 hours, the focus is now on him and his reference to the board. Compare that to when the club itself has made a statement, or when Denise has come out and put a statement in the programme or whatnot, then that deters you from discussing Moshiri as much. So it's tit for tat, it feels to me. And the association, he can't simply come out justifiably and say to us that this board are the correct people we need, which he basically said today was because they're from Liverpool. Because it's Liverpool and the locally related people. I'd love to know how he was appointed, how Bill Kenwright got him involved with Everton. Taking away the shite that man comes out and speaks about as, what was it he said, a really big chairman in another club said that Everton the best place to go to if that's the way you're looking at dealing with how football's dealt with. I know I'm not saying that verbatim, but that's what he sort of said. And then how has he gone to this man? Look, he had his history at Chelsea, didn't he, with Usmanov, and obviously they left Chelsea on a bit of a cloud. But then he comes to Everton. Here's somebody, he hasn't really got a slate behind him when he came to us, other than being a world-class accountant and doing various other things over with Usmanov and whatnot. And then, of course, we all started talking about the things, is Usmanov going to come in and we're going to be, we can buy whoever we want and whatnot. The irony is it came as an absolute nightmare. I do actually start thinking myself, I know I'm off on a bit of a tangent here, but I start thinking about what would happen if he actually wasn't with us. Would we actually be better off? I.e. the Moyes days and stuff like that, when Everton didn't have a penny to spend, we were better off. And I think that a lot, sort of which way would you go there, apart from the fact we've gone down a rabbit hole and it's been absolutely ridiculous for us. But just on that, Pete, Moshiri and the board Moshiri himself seems to, in certain parts, create a gap between him and the board by simply just hitting a straight back, he would say, I presume, and say that, well, this board that we've got, Bill, Denise, everybody else involved, these are the people we need because they're local. It astounds me that somebody I think, has advised that man to say, make sure you say the Everton are the local club, almost the people's club thing. That theme, it feels like he's trying to emphasize when he's talking to Jim White and on the letter, that we've got people who are local who get the club. And going back to what I asked you, Bill Kenwright getting him into Everton, that discussion, I'd pay a lot of money myself to hear when he first rang him, how on earth he got him here. Because that to me indicates that there's clearly something wrong with that fella. Like, I think he's got serious issues. To be the billionaire that comes in and pays all he has for Everton, and then to make them even worse, is astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think to be honest, a lot of the conversation that's probably happened in private between Bill Kenwright and Fahad Moshiri, we've probably heard sound bites from Kenwright over the last few years when he talks about the Everton board being revered, and I was speaking to a club owner the other day, and they asked what would the Everton board do. This sort of wishy-washy, everything's perfect, we all live in this ideal world sort of outlook on life that Bill Kenwright seems to have, and certainly the way he speaks about himself and how fantastic he has been for Everton Football Club. I just think that Moshiri has just bought right into that. And I genuinely believe it's almost like the most information he gets, because he doesn't actually come to Goodison Park, as we all know. He's never here. He's never actually. I wouldn't think that he'd be on Twitter looking at the backlash from supporters. He probably gets fed most of his information from the likes of Bill Kenwright, and he's never going to get the full picture. So I think when he comes out and says things like this, he's probably still under the impression that, that Bill Kenwright is this huge Evertonian and Evertonians back him, and he's like the shield between Evertonians and Moshiri. Bill Kenwright's the one who I can always refer back to and rely on to sort of put out the fires. What he doesn't realise is that people have now fully turned on Bill Kenwright, because we've seen how inadequate the board have been over the past 2 decades plus. Now, I don't think anyone can question Evertonians in terms of patience. There have been previous, uprisings, if you like, and previous, previous protests against the board, against Bill Kenwright in particular. There have been, but never on this scale. I feel like now, even people who are sat on the fence, or even people who are willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, I think this is the most I've seen in terms of a fan base fully coming together and saying enough is enough. And I spoke on 5 Live the other day, and I mentioned about Newcastle, and about comparatively to Newcastle haven't spent anywhere near the amount of money that we spent in that first sort of summer when Moshiri came in. Newcastle haven't spent anywhere near that amount. What they have done is they've come in with a clear plan, a clear structure. They've cleared out all the dead wood from the boardroom, and they've put all of their own people in. And I think that's one of the main things, is that it's all very well and good talking about, I think one of the things that Moshiri had said about is that, him and the Evertonians all want the same thing, and we're all sort of on the, singing from the same hymn sheet. Well, the thing is that they're empty words. There's no, we don't see a plan. We don't see real structure, and we don't see a way forward, and we don't see any improvements in terms of commercial deals, in terms of, revenues, in terms of the ability to sell on assets. We just don't. We've stagnated so much. We've gone backwards. We've always been, I thought the days were gone where we'd have to sell our biggest assets just to be able to, to pay the bills. But unfortunately, last summer was a prime example. The last season should have been the biggest wake-up call to everyone involved at the club. Surviving the way we did against Palace by the skin of our teeth, to survive in that way, and to then respond to that by selling our top goal scorer and not replacing him. I don't understand what world that man lives in if he thinks that was ever going to end up any other way than the position we're in now. And I just find it absolutely astounding. I mean, this guy's a billionaire. he's worth an absolute fortune. How can he be so negligent with his money? I don't understand it. I really don't. I just think that he's fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Whatever story he was told about this underperform, overachieving Everton, who didn't have any money, he's fed into that. He's been told that story, and he's fell for it hook, line, and sinker. He was probably convinced that all Everton needed was money, whereas actually what Everton needed was proper structure, proper organisation, and proper leadership from the top.
But the worst thing about that, and I'll throw this back to you, Mose, now. Excuse me, is what even if he come round to now getting things right and say if today he thought, you know what, you've all been right, I'm going to sack all the board, I'm going to sack Frank Lampard, I'm going to go and get in a top class manager, like he tried to do when he first came in with Koeman, like he tried to do with Marco Silva, and obviously the list goes on. Even if he did that, I'd still be questioning his insanity. That it's taken 6.5 years for you to get to this point where you've then thought, oh, do you know what? Maybe someone else is right here. You think about the advisors that he's got in regarding recruitment. I mean, recruitment in itself is a huge category that we could all spend hours talking about. The ridiculous signings we've made, the ridiculous sales we've made, the FFP issues and all that. But before we go to that, there's something else that's literally just been released by Alan Myers, who's just said on Twitter, I understand nobody at Everton was made aware that Moshiri was going to do the radio interview this morning. They only knew once it aired. I mean, that to all of us is not an immediate surprise, but it is absolutely fucking crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing you can take from that is, thank God no one else was aware, because we've got a far bigger issue if some form of advisor to him was actually aware that they were going to be his words. That was going to be one of my things just before you read that tweet out, Dave, of saying who at the football club has either signed off on what he said or is in charge of intercepting that guy and saying, do you know what, Fahad, everyone's going to hate you if you say anything even remotely like that on Talk Sports to Jim White. The guy's a maverick, isn't he? You've just said it yourself, Dave, in that all of these sack the board flags and banners. I understand the reasoning and the objectives behind them, but you've just said it yourself in terms of if Fahad Moshiri comes in on Sunday morning and sacks Kenwright, everyone else on the board, Frank Lampard, nothing changes. Nothing changes, because the most dangerous element of this football club is the man at the top. The question is not, and the desire is not to sack the board, it's sell the club. It's far more important that he isn't the man who is pulling the strings here, because Bill Kenwright, for years, you could label the man with so many reasons and so many words about why his running of Everton Football Club has been way off in terms of what we need and what we crave. That the man's been unambitious. He's been, a little bit pathetic, and it's a little bit of a pat on the head from other football clubs that we say, oh, well, we'll see what plucky old Everton do about this situation, and we'll be lovely and copy them. We all know the types of things that Everton are good at. We all know the types of things that Bill Kenwright is referencing there in terms of this people's club mantra that will forever be unable to get away from. Moshiri goes way above that. We're moving away from unambitious and a little bit pathetic into reckless, dangerous, probably a bit negligent. The man just carries an aura of ineptitude. And Pete mentioned the altogether now kind of uprising, for want of a better word, and the fact that Everton fans are quite clearly done with. I think it's important for non-Everton fans who listen to this and listen to so much publication that's coming out from various fan groups in the last few days. We're not just angry because our football team is crap. We've had decades to get used to that. I think the dangerous element now for certainly for me, and I think a lot of other fans, is that we've got this £500 million cloud looming over us. And I think that the money is probably the thing that has that has orchestrated this uprising. You know, football teams can go quite a lot of years without winning things and generally be a bit rubbish, but not be kind of teetering on devastation, which I think a lot of Everton fans think we are at the moment. There is a genuine fear here that we progressively get worse and worse on the pitch. We continue to be laughing stocks off the pitch, and that ultimately combines to a relegation. And you know, you don't need me to tell you the football teams that have suffered both on the pitch and financially in recent years, and they're the types of football clubs, and they're the types of stories that we all want to avoid here. You know, it's funny hearing you mention about, you know, different managers that they've come in. I am fully expecting Fahad Moshiri to go flying off to Madrid to try and get Diego Simeone on some form of mental crusade to bring successful football back to Everton. And
there was talk of Ancelotti coming back, wasn't there? Because it looks like Madrid might be about to sack him.
Who in there? And you know, as soon as you mention any of these kind of relatively ambitious plans, you feel like anyone who wants to touch this football club at all needs some form of psychological evaluation, because no one would come into this under his leadership. Absolutely no one. You know, in all of the success stories about football clubs who've had investment and spent that wisely, and you know, had a relatively healthy structure from top to bottom, who looks at Fahad Moshiri, but either as a player, a member of staff, a manager, and thinks, that's the structure, that's the platform that we're working towards. You know, we consistently hear about how these backroom works are being done to adjust and to evaluate the structure of the club and how things are run, and you know, this whatever it is plan that Kevin Felwell has to kind of redevelop Everton and how we work in the future. I don't think we can be that forward thinking at the moment. I think we've got a lot on our table right in front of our eyes before we start. You know, it's obviously important to think about the fundamentals of what Everton is going to be, and to be progressive and to look to the future. I find it hard to get ambitious about the future at the moment, and a lot of that is because Fahad Moshiri is here. As I say, I don't think it's too big a word to label with him as being a dangerous input on this team, because it will be relatively easy for him to walk away in 2 or 3 years when we've got a mediocre championship club and we're up to our eyeballs in stadium debt. But we're all going to have to live with that for the rest of our lives. You only have to look around, be it your local area or online, to see how much this impacts everyone's existence. You know, it's up for debate about whether that should be the case or not. But I think if Fahad Moshiri didn't realise the importance of his baby and his football club to the people who hold it so dear, then if he hasn't realised in the last 24 hours, he's going to realise on Saturday afternoon, because it's going to be toxic. And you know, we don't want it to be like that. There's enjoyable moments about, you know, this collective attitude that fans have had and fan groups have had, but we don't want this to be a constant battle within our own ranks, because Premier League football is difficult enough as it is to turn out results. We don't want to survive on that kind of negativity, and we don't want to always have our backs against the wall. We know that's when Everton can surprise you, and that's what we saw last season, but we will eventually trip up. This football club will ultimately be relegated if things don't change at the top. And you know, my major fear about relegation is that, show me a Premier League team who are absolutely not guaranteed to come back up after being relegated, and I'll show you Everton, because we are simply too frail and lack the resilience to be able to handle that kind of devastating reality that looks as though we're on the brink of.
Well, do you know, it's funny you say that, because I say funny in sort of really grim sort of way, but what you've said there about an Everton club that gets relegated, I've seen many people, and probably an alarming, growing amount of people, that have said, you know what, it's probably best that we go down so we can get a clean slate and come back up. That's not how it works. It does not work like that. The odd one or two have done that by throwing in loads and loads of money, and people will say, oh yeah, well, Moshiri will do that because he'll want to try and sort of say sorry to everybody by doing so and getting us back in the Premier. That is just not going to happen. because of, firstly, the idiocy that he and the board have shown, but also you think back to clubs that tried to do that. Do you remember Aston Villa, the season before they came back up? They put a ridiculous amount of money in to get new players and then end up losing in the playoffs. That happens to your club. I mean, they were very fortunate to come back up the following season. If that happened to us, I think there'd be shorter odds on Everton going down another division than coming back up to the Premier League. But just to go over to you people this as well, I mean, the first 10 seconds of what he was asked by Jim White was, do you think that the fans are still trust you? And again, that's not verbatim, that's roundabout what he said. And the reaction immediately from Moshiri was, I think so. I mean, if that in a nutshell doesn't describe everything we've just spoken for the last 40 odd minutes, and we'll move on to the actual club side of it and Lampard and whatnot in a second. I mean, there's bombs all over the place, isn't it, at the moment with the way this football club is run. But for a man to say that 7 years on, I mean, I go as far as probably saying and I remember sitting in my car after we just got out the game against Burnley at home. We lost 1-0. This is second year of Koeman. And I remember that distinctly as me, Mark and Matt were doing the post-match podcast that day in my car. And there was an international break coming up immediately after it. And at the time, a couple of us were sort of looking at each other when Matt asked the question, is it time to get rid of Koeman? And I can't remember what we said directly, but we were like, yeah, it probably is, because now's the time to do it when you've got a transfer window, you've got 2 weeks to sort it out. You bring someone in, think at the time as well, at that time, the transfer window might well have still been open around about mid-September. And, or the end of August, I don't know when it was. Anyway, when it got to that point, that, in my mind, was the real start of how ridiculous things felt from then until now. At various points, yeah, when we've went big on signing players, I've started thinking, oh, do you know what, this could go right, this. But then, in hindsight, it's a wonderful thing, of course. But even at the time after that, I'm thinking, why have we signed him? Why have we signed him? We started signing players that were the best of weaker clubs to us, i.e. Pickford at Sunderland when they went down, Sigurdsson at Swansea, don't really want to mention him, but, you know, when that happened, we signed him, their best player.
Ashley Williams.
Sorry?
Williams, yeah.
Ashley Williams.
Williams, yeah, of course. Keane at Burnley. All of that started happening, the ridiculous amounts that we spent on it. And I'm thinking, okay, at that point, which is 6 years ago, how can you keep completely ignorant to what football fans are saying? So for him to answer that question this morning to Jim White, who's asked him, do you think the fans trust you? And he says, I hope so. What do you say your reaction is to that? Complete ignorance. This probably I put this out as a question on the Chase or something like that. Would you say the answer be ignorance, idiocy, or just actually not caring? Because I think it's probably something that involves each of those.
Yeah, I think it's probably all of the above.
But if you're trying to do what you want to do with a Premier League football club, and let's face it, owners of Premier League football clubs, even the owners of Manchester City, Abramovich at Chelsea, I remember listening to bits and pieces of, you know, football finances and whatnot. Nobody buys a football club to receive a profit. How often does that happen? That somebody buys a football club, stays there for a few years, whatever amount of time it is, and then sells it for more than what they paid for it. How often does that happen in football? I would say I couldn't really suggest anybody that's been able to do that. Maybe someone who's been for years at a club that was down in League One that ended up getting up to the Championship. Little ones like that, but very, very rarely happens. Yeah. So then it's got me leading to the question, why is he actually bothering? What is he actually trying to achieve in doing this? And in what he spoke this morning and what he said in the letter, he's always, I think, sort of how he's trying to speak to the media about this is to almost suggest and make us feel that he's some sort of saviour for our football club. And again, that adds to the delusion that I feel towards this man, because there's no saviour towards us. What he's done, he's been the catalyst of making it even worse. Like I referred to a little bit earlier in the pod, the days when Everton have done their best in the Premier League has been the days when they've had no fucking money, or very, very little money, largely under Moyes. And you've reached that stage post Howard's, when we nearly went down in '98. Onwards from there up to when we got Martinez, and that's why I don't want to sit here and rave about Moyes, because that's obviously a completely different topic. Whether people loved him being here, people hated him. That's quite a divisive subject. But when you look at it on ownership of the club, and obviously there was big criticism of Kenwright quite early on from when he took it over from Johnson, wasn't there? Do you remember, what was his name? Paul Gregg, was it, who tried to take it over from him that year?
Yeah.
There's been a controversy with Bill, the stadium, the ring fence money, and all that crap about getting a new sponsorship in. And the lies, look, there are all sorts of different Everton podcasts. If any of our listeners want to go and re-explore, I don't know why they would, because they want to make themselves feel even worse. If you want to go and look at the history of the football club, ownership-wise, with Bill and the board there, all the way up to now, I don't see with Moshiri, and I'm starting to think that it's more of an ego when I look at this man than anything else. I think his own feeling towards himself is purely egotistical, that you would not either try and do something different at the football club and listen to fans and make complete changes boardroom wise. I think the way in which he's spoken in the last 24 hours, either on talking to Jim White or on that letter, both of those to me look like it's been well, this is not my fault. I've always tried to do my best at Everton. Yet, to all of us, though, Pete, that being something that's happened to all of us, if that's the case, why is this man here? Sell it.
Well, I think one thing as well, to bear in mind is, about the fact he's a billionaire at the end of the day. At no point in his life has he probably come across a problem that he couldn't solve with money. As a billionaire, you see a problem, throw money at it. And that's
and yeah, you're right about that, because that's one of the main things he mentioned is about the 700 odd million quid about the new stadium. He's trying to sell that to us still, despite the fact 40,000 of us are going to be sitting there booing the dickhead on Saturday when we're playing a 6-point relegation battle with Southampton.
Yeah, but again, it's the distraction tactic, isn't it? It's distraction. It's throwing out the big figures and pointing out about the fact. What did he say? He said the only thing a football owner or a football club owner can do is spend money, or words to that effect. Again, I just think he lives in a world where money solves everything, and he probably thinks that money is such a distraction for us that we'd be. We'd be doughy-eyed and so grateful that he.
Well, we certainly were when he first came, weren't we?
Well, absolutely, and to be honest, I think that was because we thought we made the assumption that he would, as a billionaire, he'd actually know how to spend his money. But again, a football club, it doesn't work like that. You can't just throw money at a problem and expect it to get results. Football is far more complicated than that. Football is far more complicated than it was 20 years ago. There's more money involved. There's different, it's gone up so many levels since the time when, Bill Kenwright would have taken over from Peter Johnson. You were talking about tens of millions. Now you're talking hundreds of millions. It's been scaled up exponentially, and everything that comes along with that in terms of, as I say, revenues, in terms of advertising, in terms of everything else, all of the other things that the other clubs seem to be doing so much better than us. I just think he's totally out of his depth. But again, I just think that in the world of a billionaire, in his mind, money solves everything. Well, in this case, money isn't going to solve everything.
What I would say about that, sorry, Pete, you just absolutely rang in my head then when you said about, the prospect of a billionaire running a football club, which is as you look at it, that's what's happening at Everton at the moment. I would probably say for all of the, I'm assuming that most of the Premier League club owners are very wealthy. I think if you let any of those 20 owners run the football club as hands-on as Fahad Moshiri does, you'd probably get a mess at every single one of them. They are not, generally speaking, football people. As you've quite rightly said, Pete, they throw money at problems. They to a large extent don't have an idea about sort of the technical aspects about how to put a team together or how to put a team together who is in charge of putting the team together. If you give them as much leeway to run the club as we have done with Moshiri running Everton, you'd get disasters across the league. And the reality of why that doesn't happen is because they're usually quite intelligent people who recognise the fact that they are not football managers or directors of football or football agents, all of these things that Fahad Moshiri has tried to be in recent years. And they go out and appoint football people and technical people to do the correct jobs at the correct level. And we could rattle off the number of names who've been involved in a plethora of different levels of this football club in the last 5 or 6 years. And why Fahad Moshiri has rattled through those people is because he thinks that he ultimately knows best. That's why we're 19th in the league and we're up to our eyeballs financially, and everyone despises our football club because he has failed to put together a team. Whether you think that team is playing staff, whether it's the correct manager, whether it's the correct director of football, who knows if we have that right now, or more predominantly, whether he's able to put people on the board who know how to run a football club and a business. How many times have we referenced just in the last hour the fact that this man is just a very good accountant? Why is he talking to Keir Jarabchan about who we swap El Ghazi for? It's just absolutely mental that this fella has been able to pull the strings in the manner that he has done, and ultimately, until he is able to put together that team, we are left with him treating this football club as a circus. My big problem there is that it's okay to say, Farhad, settle down. You need to put a capable team together. Where is the evidence to suggest that he is capable of doing that?
When you say team there, Mark, by the way, you mean him more in the literal sense of the football team, as in the people who run it, or do you actually mean the board? Obviously, it's the same thing in both directions, but I just want to get clarification of which one you've meant there.
Very more so the board, because I think if we're asking Moshiri to have any form of direct input into the team, then that just goes against all the things I've said that I don't want him to do. I don't want Fahad Moshiri to be at games. I don't want him to be talking about Frank Lampard on Sky Sports News. All of these things that we kind of champion about communication, and we want to hear from Moshiri constantly. I don't want to hear from Everton's board or their owner ever, because we should never have to do that. All of the business of running the club, and the people that we should be hearing from are Frank Lampard, is all of the managerial staff. It should never go beyond that. I can't even begin to tell you more than 3 or 4 Premier League owners, because we never hear or see them. They don't run their football club as a pantomime.
I want to push towards the end of this part of the conversation, lads, because I'm just conscious of time, as well as we want to have a quick chat on Lampard, the squad, and this massive game against Southampton coming up. But on the other side of it, Mark's just mentioned this here, Pete, about the board. And I'm also conscious that I referred to this a little bit earlier. It sounds like when you talk about one of them, you sort of are deterring yourself away from speaking about the other, as in Moshiri / the board. So this little bit I want to finish with it on the board itself is, why have they persisted with what they have there. Now, I know the easy answer to that is Bill Kenwright decided to get Denise because it's either the easy option or it's somebody that's up his arse a little bit. I think, he has his team, he has his support, he has people who protect him and what they'd say about him at the football club. That has obviously started to rapidly go lower and lower when it comes to the fan base. But why do you think ultimately, given how poor things have been, given what Moshiri hasn't really said about how poor things are, and the reason why he's backed the board in saying that they're from Liverpool, and I had no idea why he would say that, but what keeps them where they are? Is it laziness? Is it what I said at the start, where perhaps he's just not asked and he just wants a load of people to deal with something that's his? Because if that's the case, it makes him even more insane, I would say, to think that, oh, well, I'll leave these here because they're from Liverpool and I'll just leave it to them to sort it out, when I don't really know anybody else who could get in as the board who could sort this out. I don't think that's true, because he's gone down the route of brands, of Usmanov's people, of people that he suggested himself. Usmanov's son, wasn't it, that was in there as well, and the accountant that he got was part of that team as well, I think. I can't believe that. And this is what makes me so frustrated, so much to the point where I've had sleepless nights over thinking about this man. But to direct the board here, why do you think he's kept on the people that he's got there? Is it as a loyalty to Bill Kenwright, who brought him to the club? Is it that Bill Kenwright, all he's ever done since he's been there, which I do believe he would have done, is constantly bang on about how effective he is as what he's done? There's no better chairman than me. Again, not verbatim, he said that in the past too. Which is it for you?
I think it's a lot to do with that. I think in terms of the story that he was sold when he bought into the club, I think that plays a massive part. I think he thinks that he's obviously got faith in Bill Kenwright and full faith in Bill Kenwright. But the other thing about it as well is that he's probably very reluctant to admit that he's wrong in his assumption that Bill Kenwright would be the right person to be in charge of, or to be the chairman of the football club. I think it's very that particular decision and the particular decision of the people on the board are absolutely his. They are absolutely his decision. He can sort of have a barrier in terms of managerial decisions, in terms of the money spent. He can just sort of say, "Well, I gave the money. I've backed the managers by giving the money." He's got a bit of a, there's a bit of a blanket there where he can sort of take himself away from the situation. But when it comes down to his decision in terms of the boardroom, that is his decision and his decision alone. And I think he's at the stage now where it's almost like he has to stick with it. But in his head, he thinks he can't start again. I think he feels like he's too far in and he can't start again. So he's just got to keep this blind faith with the people who he put the trust in from day one. And I just feel like that faith was totally misguided, and I think he'll be regretting it massively. I think I cannot figure the man out. Like you said, Dave, I just cannot figure the man out, because
he's an enigma, isn't he?
He is, because he's supposedly he's a billionaire accountant, but he doesn't seem to care about his money or his investment. But then he must do, because why would he continue to put money in? I honestly, I'd love someone to sit down and just get into his mind, get him sat down with a psychologist.
Yeah, the problem you've got there, Peter,
do a study on him.
Exactly. But the problem you've had on that is, I know he's come out and done various interviews. Obviously, the club's media itself, in inverted commas, have done that. But they're only ever going to dance to his tune, aren't they? He's not going to allow a journalist like myself or Matt or anybody else we know to go in and have an half an hour chat with him and do an interview with him and record it. He's never going to allow you to do that, because, well, I don't think he's that insane as much as everything else that he's done is pointed in that direction.
To come on Subs Weekly?
I'd rather get him on the mailbag, to be honest with you, just to get his full perspective on with Les. But in a more serious direction of this now, that what you've said about him, there, and I want to get Mark's view on what you've just said there, Peter, about him, because I do think it's spot on. But where does this go? What direction does this go in for you, Mark? Because it looks like we're at a crossroad, but that would imply that we're going to do something about this. But it looks to me, after what he said, after the letter that he's put in there, it's just like we crack on here. And the only thing he's going to change, if anything, would be Frank Lampard being the Everton manager, and it would purely refer to what he would like to see done on the pitch and off the pitch with the manager, and the team. It's almost like last year, that thing that you referred to a lot earlier in the podcast, Mark, when you said when we stayed up against Palace, and we had a big chat about this the other day, didn't we, Pete? About this should never happen again. Yeah. I'd almost wanted to get a tattoo of that somewhere on my body. I don't know where, but somewhere on my body that says that just can't happen again. I think even players came out saying it. I think Lampard might have referred to it, but yet here we are, sat halfway through a season. Feels like to me the World Cup was a bit of a godsend, really, to not have us play and waste matches. But then again, we're going to have to at some point anyway. Again, as ludicrous continues to that side of things, doesn't it, Mark?
I mean, I'm not going to lie, Dave. You've lost me focus now, because all I can.
How could I not with this clown?
I just want Fahad Moshiri on mailbag videoed having a straight. That's all we're here for now.
I thought you meant because the thought of where Dave was going to get his tattoo.
That's definitely all of the mailbag. But I'm going to message Les about that. I want Les to ask whoever's on the show tomorrow, where would they get a tattoo on themselves? The first two things the Fahad Moshiri have done.
The thing I'd just pull up again, just Pete mentioned about the fear of starting again. And there was a couple of times when I listened to Moshiri that I thought that was absolutely spot on. We all feel this kind of tedious nature of false dawns and regenerations at Everton, in terms of, whether it's a new owner or a new director of football or playing staff or a manager. You always get that kind of supposed bounce on the back of any one of those things happening, and the promise of change. We've seen too much of that in the last decade, haven't we, in terms of failure to actually achieve any of those things. And I found it a little bit strange almost about how defiant Moshiri was in his defence of Frank Lampard when he was asked about it today, because people will be clipping that in 3 weeks' time when he sacks him after a defeat at West Ham or Arsenal or whatever it may be. And it feels as though he's kind of just aimlessly doubling down on the current situation to say, we need to ultimately stick with something. So we're going to stick with Lampard and we're going to stick with Kenwright, because quite frankly, I am too tired and lack the knowledge in order to actually impact a positive change on any of those things. I appreciate he was probably pushed to comment on Lampard today, but I thought you're probably going to look a little bit silly in a few weeks when you ultimately make that change. Which when we lose this, we're probably going to lose. Yeah. I'd say probably. I'm looking at this game against Southampton, thinking, they went and beat Man City the other night 2-0. They've got a manager who looks like a bit of a nutcase himself, by the way, Nathan Jones. But it would be no surprise if Southampton got a point against us. That's a big blow for us, given the fixtures we've got. And then we have to go to West Ham away, another 6 points towards the bottom. If Lampard doesn't get a win, at least one win from those two, there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to be sacked. Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why, that those comments have potentially come 48 hours before he does the exact thing which he's just said he's not going to. So I don't know, people within football always find a way to say the wrong things at the wrong times, don't they? But you asked a very broad question there, Dave, in terms of where do we go from here? What changes?
Well, not so much where do we go. I'm not asking for each of our suggestions. I'm asking, where do you think it is going to go?
Yes, yeah. What will happen? I stand by the fact that I don't think there's a great deal of change here unless Fahad Moshiri sells Everton. Do I think he will sell Everton? Absolutely not. So I'm led back to the original. Nothing will change, and that's ultimately been the story of Everton, hasn't it? In terms of, when was that season ticket campaign about nothing will be the same again? And ever since then, everything's been exactly the same every year.
But black comedy is great with us, isn't it? It's always like so dark whenever you're trying to be funny about this.
I mean, we endlessly search for 2 decades to find an owner who is ultimately useless. How long is it now going to take? As Pete referenced, that sense of ego about Fahad Moshiri. It's one thing going out and finding someone to actually, mental as it may seem, invest copious amounts of money into Everton and actually purchase them. It's another thing to actually convince Fahad Moshiri that is the right thing to do. It's debatably a lot harder to kind of cross that mental barrier for him to sell as it is to physically go out and find someone. We like to think that we have an impact as a fan base. The sit-in and the protests on Saturday, they are important. They absolutely have to happen, and that they're a wonderful show of unity by fans across the globe. What does it achieve? What will it achieve? I personally think that he is far too stubborn a man to allow any form of fan influence. I mean, sit-in protests, singing at the board. The man's got to be there. The man's got to watch Everton in order to be impacted by any of these things. I have no idea what that fella's itinerary is like on a Saturday afternoon, but I bet you it's not banging his laptop on to find a stream to watch Everton at home to Southampton. There is absolutely no way that anything that happens on Saturday will impact him, other than a defeat at home to the bottom team in the league means that Frank Lampard gets sacked. The exact thing which Fahad Moshiri said today that he won't do. The man can't win, and he doesn't deserve to win because he's dug himself into this hopeless situation. From a playing point of view, and I know we've kind of briefly toyed with the idea of talking about Everton kicking a football here, but yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on, Dave, in terms of Frank Lampard is very much teetering on the edge here. I think that the reason why the knives aren't quite out for Lampard, he's obviously dug himself in a little bit of good favour in terms of keeping Everton, whether you think it was him or any other individual, in terms of keeping us in the league. There is a kind of a goodwill there. We're at least still talking about a man who we all say he's a nice man, but. And that hasn't always been the case with previous Everton managers. But I think that the harsh reality is now, I'm not going to throw the off-the-cuff statement of who do we go and get then. But I think there's a collective acceptance here in that whoever Everton go out and install as a manager at this club will forever be in this constant cycle of failure because of the man who ultimately runs the show. And I think that's why a lot of us aren't. Results are bad enough. You can look at Everton's win percentage and Frank Lampard's win percentage and our XG and whatever other stat you want to look at to tell yourself that Everton are rubbish. None of them lie. But in any other situation, if the hostility at board level wasn't there, we'd all be on Frank Lampard's back, lashing our season tickets at him on Saturday. And it's not going to be like that, because there is that understanding that the issues are far greater. That shouldn't be justification for saving Lampard if the correct decision is to sack him. But I think the target of most Evertonians now is rightly taken away from him. But he'll get everything from us on Saturday, won't he? He'll get far more than what managers in his situation have in previous seasons. But it does feel as though we're kind of just churning over week after week. Ultimately, a coach greeting or a load of flares and the Gladys won't pull us through one weekend, and it'll keep us in the relegation zone. And ultimately, whether it's this season or in the next couple of seasons, if nothing greater changes, then we all know the way that this is heading.
Yeah, there is a feeling of if he's going down, we'll go down with him here, isn't there?
Yeah.
Simply because I think there's a sympathy thrown towards him. I don't think there's been a previous manager that's had this sympathy that people have now due to the board, that they see that very much as against him, I think, by and large. Well, the thing about Saturday, Pete, and obviously refer to what Mark just said then as well as this, but the boards, like Mark said then, they're not going to have Moshiri at the ground. He's not going to be there. He's going to be, I don't know what he's going to be doing. Certainly won't be watching Everton anyway, like Mark said. But the rest of the board are going to be there, you would think. Certainly Denise Barrett-Baxter is going to be there because he goes to every game at home. Is the like Mark said there? I don't think you said it, Mark. I don't want to put words in your mouth here. It's not futile doing what the plan is, protest wise, at the weekend.
Yeah.
But the board side of things, and this is where I go back to banging on about this point all the way through. This is a common theme in this podcast. Is, Moshiri's not there, so therefore we have to go towards the board. And the two separate entities that people seem to be or seem to have to choose. Do you see it as being a big effect, such as if Bill was there? I don't think he's going to be. But Barrett Baxendale is going to be there. Maybe a couple of other. Sharpie's going to be there. What effect is that going to have? And I'm not saying that to deter from people actually doing it, because I'm going to be there and I'm going to do it. I'm not saying that it's going to be ineffective, because ultimately it'll be in the media. There'll be plenty of discussions about it, and essentially that's what we want. We want to continue. The momentum carries on if you persist with this. I think the dream would be for many people that ultimately it ends up with the ball being sacked by Moshiri, and he's the only one who's able to learn what needs to be done. But yet, most of us, I think all of us, doubt that he'd be able to do that anyway. It's literally whichever, when you're in the fork there to go in whatever direction you want to. There's a level of this that needs to be addressed. What are you feeling about this on Saturday? And I know for a fact you're going to be around, aren't you, on Saturday after the game?
Oh, definitely. I'll definitely be around after the game. I think, like you touched on, the main thing is to make it. No matter how many statements come out of the club and how many times someone can try and pull the wool over the eyes of the national media, I think the Evertonians are going to make our feelings very clear on Saturday, and I think that's massively important. And it is becoming a story. The fact that from the fan groups putting out a statement from a week ago.
Well, hang on a minute. You two have been over national media for the last week or so as well, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, that's it. We've, I think there's been a snowball effect from that Brighton game when the crowd were singing to sack the board. That was kind of the start of it. That was the first time, as I say, that I'd seen a massive number of supporters come together. Whereas previously, when people had protested against the board and protested against decisions made by the football club, I always felt that it didn't really have the legs. It didn't really have the bodies to make
divided
any great
fan base as well, wasn't it?
It was, and I feel like now it seems a lot more compact, and it seems that everyone has finally come together as one. And I've never been part of any kind of protest group or anything like that. It's never been something I've always wanted to be sort of supporting the players primarily and first and foremost. But I think that message is loud and clear from all of the supporters clubs, from all of the groups, from all of the people who were talking about organising this protest on Saturday, that primarily we are going to support the team. Everyone's going to be there to support the team and try and help to get us out of this mess that we're in. But at the same time, whatever the result is on Saturday, even if we win 4 or 5-0 on Saturday, which, by the way, I'm not saying is going to happen, regardless of what happens, the wool will not be pulled over Evertonians' eyes for any longer. It's the only way, really, that we can get our points across. And at the end of the day, if Fahad Moshiri has anything in terms of investing in Everton, it is money. And at the end of the day, his investment is not going to be looking very attractive to anyone else. When they see the images coming out from the football club, where the fans are absolutely livid with the board of directors. And if anything's going to force a change, it's going to be that, because it's going to be the embarrassment and it's going to be the impact on him. When the world sees just how much Evertonians have such disdain for the board, So yeah, it's really is the only way we can get our points across, and it might not be for everyone. Not everyone's going to stay behind. I don't think there's going to be 40,000 people staying behind after Saturday, but there'll certainly be more than a couple of hundred, or a few people that have stayed behind before. I feel like the atmosphere in the build-up with the coach greeting and everything else that surrounds it, and even just the fact that everyone will know that this protest is happening. I really hope that translates into a horrible but great Goodison atmosphere on Saturday. I want to see the best of Goodison. I want to see angry supporters in all four corners, but I want to see it directed at the Southampton players. I want to see it directed at the referee. I want to see us get behind our players, and I want us to make it a cauldron and a bear pit. I want it to be horrible, and I know it will be. I want us, I'm as apprehensive as I am about the match. I'm actually looking forward to it, Dave. I can't wait.
Do you know? I think this is catch-22 personally, because undoubtedly I think that all three of us who've done this podcast today would agree, and please tell me if you don't, that things still need to get worse before it gets any better. I'd probably go as far as saying that you wouldn't see Fahad Moshiri leave Everton unless we went down. Now, obviously, none of us as an Everton fan want us to go down, because, like we said before, we probably wouldn't come back up and probably go down even further here. And that, to me, really makes it difficult for many fans, because you've got this massive opposition against Board, against Moshiri, as we've banged on about for over an hour here. But then you look at, if Everton stay up and we did what we did against Palace at the end of last season, by and large, other than until the transfer window finished in summer and we didn't sign a striker, there wasn't the level of criticism and anger towards the owner and the board as what we're seeing now. Mm-hmm. So therefore, and I'm trying to ask this honestly, do you not think that if we do win against Southampton and then we do win against West Ham, and then I think there's 2 points that separate 7 sides here in the bottom half of the league, you can go up to 30. We could go above, if the results go our way this weekend, we could go above Leicester, who are in 13th place. If that was to happen, do you not think that eases everything towards the board and towards Moshiri? I mean, for everything we've spoken about him, he said that today, that he doesn't want to change the manager. I think he said it to Jim White and also on the letter. Does that not prove to you that if we go and do this, then he thinks it eases? This is right up his street, isn't it? The fact that Everton have gone and got 6 points from 2 games and then look a little bit easier being in mid-table.
Yeah.
Is he not sitting there looking at this thinking, you know what, this is exactly what I planned and exactly what I wanted? And that's what I mean. That, like, Everton fans in many ways can't win here, can they?
I'm just halfway through writing a tweet that says Dave Downey thinks Everton need to go down.
Don't you dare. Don't you dare.
Dave Downey thinks relegation is best.
Yeah, and then thinks League One when we go to probably more.
Yeah.
Disgrace. A disgrace.
The conference could reignite Everton.
Answer me question. Stop that nonsense.
I absolutely know where you're coming from in terms of with every positive result on the pitch, the pressure off it subsides, doesn't it? Everything about everyone who's involved in this kind of fan unity will stand by the fact that absolutely cannot be the case. But it's
everyone's turned into Twitter, like you just mentioned there, and take the piss out of me. But when you think like post-match, and we've got to do the post-match podcast and whatnot after the game, people will be referring to this and then having to say, but that doesn't change anything. That's got to be at the end of what everybody says. But nonetheless,
it does.
It does. It does. It absolutely changes anything, whether we like it or not.
It's human nature, isn't it? It's human nature.
Exactly. But
I'm not going to be talking about Fahad Moshiri selling Everton at 6 o'clock on Saturday if Pete's magical prediction comes off and we actually have 4 or 5 shots on target and we win the game. My hostility will temporarily subside. I'm relying on other people to not allow on the pitch matters to impact that. You know, the reality of the situation, if we take all of this away and all of the kind of board level chat that's gone on in the last couple of weeks, we need to win football matches. There's no point sacking a board of a football club that will ultimately go out of business if we get relegated, potentially, because we need to have a successful football team. I absolutely despise talking about the club's board and the stadium and.
I don't think it's like we have two football clubs.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I don't want to talk about the legacy project at Goodison Park or whatever. You know, all of those things. The 90 minutes of kicking the football. That is ultimately why we're all here. And it's sad that we all have to talk about these things, and we absolutely do at the moment. Don't get me wrong. But I totally understand your point in being that to impact change at Everton, it always feels as though we have to consistently drill down to the lowest point before we actually do anything about it. You know, relegation is the obvious sign of that. I totally echo what you've just said in terms of, whilst Everton are a Premier League football club, I don't see Fahad Moshiri moving on, because he sees the club and the new stadium and, you know, taking this club on another 2 or 3 years and possibly getting us into Europe and possibly delivering on all of these mental promises which Denise Barrett-Baxendale delivered in a shareholders meeting years ago about us potentially, you know, competing for the Premier League within 5 years, or something mental that was uttered on that night. That's the only way that Fahad Moshiri gets back that financial investment, isn't it? You said about earlier in the show about how do these billionaire owners gain anything from a football club? It's ultimately getting Everton to that point. He either has to do that, or comically talk about all those things that he needs to do at Everton to achieve that, or he has to admit defeat, or he has to be relegated. Which of those are the least likely to happen? And for me, it's him holding his hands up at the end of a season where we have a mediocre 15th or 16th place finish and saying, do you know what, lads, we've got away with it for the last couple of years, but this is clearly not for me. I am clearly not the man to drive this forward. None of us know the man personally, but he doesn't exactly give you that impression, does he, of someone who's going to step back and say, this is clearly not working for the good of something that I have said over the last few years I care about so much. I'm going to step away and let someone else do this. It's quite simply not going to happen until we hit our lowest low.
It's got to be one extreme or the other. You're absolutely right. To finish this, lads, because we could go on all day and all night, and this has been a bumper, nearly an hour and a half we've been talking here. Simple answers to give me. This weekend, Southampton at home. Obviously, I want to know what you think we're going to do and how it's going to go. But if I fast forward here, just under 3 weeks, just over 2 weeks to the end of the January transfer window, are Everton still going to have Frank Lampard as their manager? And also, how do you think we'll get on this weekend? To you first, Pete.
I think Lampard will be here. I think that they'll stick with him. I think if they're going to make the change, I think he'd probably do what's happened in the past, and it'll be, pushing the emergency button with 10 games.
Could he not walk, by the way? This is another thing I forgot to put to you both. Do you not think at the point of this, he's thinking, sod this, I want to get back down to London with my lovely wife and whatnot, who's on Loose Women, and I'll go on Loose Women rather than support Everton. Do you think there's a point where he walks?
Managers don't resign these days, Dave. There's just too much money in it.
He's got too much money anyway. He's a Champions League winner, one of the best Premier League footballers in that era. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. Ultimately, I can't see him walking.
No.
But, I mean, it's sort of a devil's advocate sort of question there. How far down does he need to go before he walks? Did he walk he didn't walk at Chelsea. He sat at Chelsea. Did he walk at Derby?
Did he go straight from Derby to Chelsea, did he?
Yeah. Yeah. I think they bought him out of his contract, didn't they?
Yeah. But yeah, that is by the by. It's just another thing I forgot to mention. Yeah. So you think he'll still be here?
I think he'll still be here. I'm hoping against hope that we've got to win on Saturday. There's no two ways about it. We've just got to. A draw won't be good enough.
And if we do win, mate, like you said, we all want us to win. But will we all be sitting there at the end of the game after we won 4 or 5-0, applauding the chairman and the board?
No, I don't think there's any chance. I don't think there's any chance of that happening, to be honest with you. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the 89th minute, Mr. Kenwright comes walking out of out of one of the lounges to stand
with the 95 FA Cup trophy.
Yeah. He'll be stood there at the front, singing if you know your history and all that at the end of the game if we do win. Yeah, you can just see it. You can see it now, can't you?
Yeah, I can see him going down to the pitch side and bringing Sylvester Stallone on as a last minute.
Brilliant. Yeah, if you didn't laugh, you cried. That's the football club. Yeah, we should change our motto. That maybe change the Blue Room motto. But thanks as always for this bumper podcast. I hope everybody's made it through to the end on this, because we have had a bit of a laugh on top of the sheer depression and insanity that continues to go on operating this football club. Where it will end, no one will know. But all three of us will be there on Saturday. We'll be doing the post-match after that as well. God knows what we're going to be saying then. Certainly if we haven't won anyway, and if Frank Lampard's still the manager, there's still plenty of things up in the air. And what a ridiculous owner we have, and a football club that's run. We've got the best supporters in the world, in all of our opinions. Obviously, most fans are going to say that about their clubs, but I truly think we've got the best fans going. It's going to be a sellout crowd there at home in a big 6-point battle against Southampton. Not many other clubs are going to do that. What are Everton going to do next? We'll find out soon. Thanks very much for listening.